So, hello and welcome back to another evening recapping the Phoenix Endangered. We are almost done recapping this book. Um, things seem to be definitely coming together as they always do near the end of a book. We've got Harrier and Trissel fighting their first battles and being rescued by Ankeldar after being taken prisoner by the Isvani. We've got the Isvani, the army of Isvani, completely decimating all but one of the Atreyu cities. And the fact is, they can't really, I mean, they can be blamed for what they're doing, but they think they're doing right, which makes it really, it makes it a very morally gray issue. Then we've got Bisochim, who is back there thinking that he is doing things in the way they should be done because he's being lied to, and he's doing it completely out of love. And so you can't, I mean, you can't love him, but you can't hate him. This is a big, messy, complicated stew. Speaking of big, messy, complicated stews, I cleaned out my garden, my raised bed today, and I harvested. I feel so silly even saying harvested. I harvested my cabbages and the last couple cucumbers and then cleaned all that out. I pulled and got rid of all of the bolted lettuce and the bolted broccolis. And so the only thing I have left in my raised bed now is my jalapeno peppers and my tomatoes. I doubt I get any more tomatoes, but the peppers I think I'm going to leave on at least until we get a frost, and then I'll just pull all the peppers that are on there and bring them in and deal with them. But I had to show you, I had to show you my cabbages. They kind of were a failure, but they're still edible, and they have to be the cutest failure that I've ever had. So 5 cabbages, and when I tell you I can hold them in 2 hands, I think these two are not even tennis ball sized. And then this one might make a good tennis ball, and these two maybe, I don't know. I'm going to eat them because I grew them. But I think the fact that we didn't get rain and I I never got outside to water them. I think that is probably what happened because my goodness, they're small. But you know what? That's okay. It's still a win because I grew them and I'm going to eat them. And I had the other one that was about this size. And honestly, I shredded it up and I used it in a pork stir fry, and it was exactly the right size for a 2 people to have a pork stir fry. I mean, it was bulked up with cauliflower and broccoli and carrots and a little bit of pork. So it made for a very satisfying meal. I'm just laughing and calling these single serve appetizer cabbages. It's fine. It actually is fine. I have no problem with my silly little single serve cabbages. Yeah, life is silly sometimes. Where life is not silly is in the Phoenix Endangered, where we are going to be jumping back in and recapping chapters 18 and 19. And chapter 18 is titled Forged in Fire. So, chapter 18, we are back with the Isvani and Bisochim again. And we start off with Bisochim, who is, you know, thinking about all of the things he's learned since being bonded to Saravase. He's made constructs which kind of remind me of the stone golems in the Obsidian trilogy that High Magic brought to life. They kind of remind me of that. It's basically the wild magic version of those. And he's thinking, it's become a simple matter. You can make seemings of life out of uh, stone, you can make it out of wood, you can make it out of pretty much anything. But and he's mastered that. He can even make them talk. He's pretty good. But to make an actual doppelganger out of flesh, that takes real skill. And that's what he's been practicing. Because his whole plan is to put a tenant inside this flesh construct that he is going to make. Quoting, "Not an unwilling captive, a willing, even eager tenant. And once she was bound within her prison of flesh, once she had granted him the immortality that was his payment, the immortality that would free Saravase from death forever, he would bind her with spells, trapping her eternally both in flesh and rock. Then darkness would be returned to the world and set the balance right, and yet it would be imprisoned where it could do no harm. Then his task would be complete, and the balance would be restored, and the Isvani would be safe." So now we see his real plan. So his idea is he's going to take this elemental spirit of darkness that's been whispering in his ear for who knows how many years, and he's going to give it a body. And then, of course, he's going to capture it once it makes his dragon immortal and him immortal as well. And all will be right with the world. It's a very simplistic, childish view that he is taking, but that's his reasoning. And, he's thinking with quite a bit of hubris that back when he started, he was pretty sure that these elemental spirits of darkness were trying to trick him, trying to lead him astray, but he was too smart for them. He was too great, and he's this close to doing it. Especially now that he sent all of the hot-headed troublemaker Isvani off on a wild goose chase of finding the Nalzinder. He's got it. No more thought than that. He can concentrate now on his true task of making a flesh golem to house the spirit of darkness and set the world right, because only he can do it. Then we transition over to one of the Isvani who is traveling along with Xanatar, who is the leader of this war band, who has been declaring war on the Atreyu cities. And we get a little bit of a POV from this character who was one of a set of twins, and his twin has died in one of these attacks, but that just binds him more tightly to Xanatar's mission that has been given to them supposedly by Bisochim to avenge the blue robes and cleanse the Atreyu cities. And they're so deluded. I feel bad for everybody in these Isvani tribes because they think they're doing right. And it always makes me wonder, if you truly look at history, like side tangent here, if you truly look at history, it's always written by the winners, but we are always the hero of our own stories. So in the story that Bisochim is writing for himself right now, he's the hero. He is the good guy. we're seeing the story from Harrier and Tercell's POV mainly, so they're the hero. And I don't think anyone's ever written a story from the truly bad guy's POV, but they also think they're the hero. I mean, it really makes you think a lot. But anyway, we spend a few paragraphs with this Isvani who is now heading back towards Bisochim to let Bisochim know that they have won a great victory. Xanatar has sent this person back to let Bisochim know that they've won a great victory and that they took these demon children captive, Harrier and Tercel, and that Xanatar will be coming along soon enough with Harrier and Tercel in tow, and he's expecting to be praised. So then we transition back to, by the way, I'm only going to try to say the name of the fire sprite shrine where everybody's living a couple times, because it's another one of those, thank you Mercedes Lackey and James Mallory for doing all these things that I can't pronounce, but it is Tel Inchital. We'll see. Maybe I'll be able to do that one more often. Anyway, that's the fire sprite shrine. That is the lake of fire. That is where Bisochim has his incredible fortress and gardens, and that's where all the Isvani are. And we transition back there, and it's a very special day for Bisochim, because something that doesn't happen very often anymore has happened, and Saravase's there. She won't talk to him anymore, but he goes up and he tells her everything. He tells her all of his dreams, all of his hopes, everything that he's hoping to do, and she is just looking at him like, and she refuses to speak. And one of Bisochim's constructs, not one with elemental darkness in it, thankfully, comes up and is like, Master, urgent, you must come. Bisochim turns and goes down to see what this servant has brought this time. It's never anything good. And when he finds out what it is, well, he finds out from one of the other Isvani. What can be so urgent now? Bisochim demanded with ill grace. Kazat, the son of Galatas of the Thandali Isvani, has returned from the Isvai. He says that their losses were heavy, but that they have been successful, and the murders of the blue robes have been avenged, and the Atreyu cities are no more. The construct's voice was as expressionless as its face. The stone homunculus spoke of triumph or disaster in the same monotone. But at its words, Saravase threw back her head and began to laugh. So obviously, Saravase probably already knew about this. In fact, Bisochim thinks that. And he is utterly horrified. And all of his Isvai who are in the encampment, in the fortress, are celebrating because they all think this is what Bisochim wanted. And they hear the story from the Isvani who are coming in that they found a dead wild mage, and they knew that only magic could slay magic, so they figured it must be somebody in the Atreyu cities. And so they went forth, and with much privation and much hardship, they have cleansed all but one of the Atreyu cities, and Bisochim has absolutely no choice but to suck it up and let them celebrate. Because if he tells them the truth, they'll probably turn on him and kill him. So he just sits back, and this isn't what he wanted. He is horrified by the fact that they went out and turned into exactly what he didn't want them to be, which is an army. But he is a little bit interested about the end of the tale and these two demon children. He figures that inadvertently his Isvani actually did something kind of good for him, because he figures that these two demon children, our power just went out. That was really weird. Our two demon children are probably the forces of light that he's been trying to hunt down anyway. So he's like, hey, that's pretty cool. Now, he can't magically go out because he has wards all around his city. And as Tercel pointed out, if you want your magic to go outside of the ward, you have to bring the ward down. So he's just going to sit back and he's going to wait for Xanatar to show up and bring him these demon children so that he can kill them, and then all will be right in the world. He can do his little magic trick of putting the spirit of darkness into flesh and then imprisoning her, and don't worry, Saravase will have a millennium after that to maybe someday forgive him, and all will be well. So that is how that chapter ends. And Bisochim, despite the fact that he is I was going to say a terrible person, he's not. And I think that that's what makes this trilogy more heartbreaking in some ways than the first trilogy, because Bisochim is doing terrible things. He's making an army, he's trying to bring darkness back into the world, but he's doing it A, out of love, and B, because he's being tricked. So you can't totally hate him. And then you bring it one step removed from that, and you have all of the Isvani who he lied to, who are doing even more despicable things, but they're doing it thinking that they're the good guys. It's heartbreaking in so many ways. Anyway, I'm going to get a drink, and we're going to recap one more chapter when I get back. I also need to put these cabbages into the refrigerator, so give me 1 minute. All right, clock reset, and now cabbages put away, yay. And we are on to recapping chapter 19, which is a fun, but again, it's another kind of short chapter, but it's a lot more fun because we're with Harrier and Tercel yet again, our bickering friends. And chapter 19 is titled Strangers from the Sky. And it picks up with actually not Harrier and Tercel, but Sharia. Her name is spelled Shaira. Sharia? I'm just going to keep calling her Sharia. Anyway, and she and her people, who, if you remember, she took to Abi Abadashar, which is an old city, ruined city, built mostly in the ground, and she's been hiding there ever since. And it's now been 6 months that she's been down there. And, she and her people are actually living pretty good. They're exploring the city. They have these gardens to go through. They've discovered some things that they don't have. One of those things is actually salt, but Sharia knows that they can actually go harvest salt from the salt flats in the desert. And a couple of months after they arrive in Abi Abadashar, she sends out a small group to go and harvest the salt. When the group comes back, one of them, Marap, lets her know that there is basically a road through the desert with wells. And Sharia despairs a little bit because she knows that for Wells to be out here in the Barileth, which is basically the what is it, the Rub Akali of the Sahara, in the worst part of this desert, for there to be wells, they had to have been made by Bisochim, and she's a little bit freaked out because instead of taking her people far away from him to get to safety, she's like, we're like next door neighbors. This is so not good. But she decides that the wild magic has sheltered them thus far, and it either will continue to shelter them or it won't, but she can't exactly take her people anywhere else, so they're just going to keep hiding in Abi Abadashar. And she also, along with many of her other people, are trying to learn new skills because the Nalzindar were always hunters, and that's all they were. Everything else that they needed, they traded for, but hiding now, Sharia knows that they're going to have to learn some new skills like spinning and weaving and all of these things to stay self-sufficient. She is trying to spin thread from goat hair. It's not going very well, so she is extremely happy when Cinnarin, her best friend, comes and lets her know that there are strangers in Abi Abadashar. And Sharia is definitely a little bit worried about this. Quoting, "There are strangers in Abi Abadashar. Tell me of them. How came they here?" Sharia willed herself to calm. Neither anger or fear would help them now. "There are only two." Cinnarin sounded both puzzled and worried. "And they are not Isvani. They speak in loud, foolish voices and behave as children, yet they have the shape of men. I know not how they came." Cinnarin goes on to say that, as was their custom, they were still looking for more and more like secret escapes and exits out of their tunnels. And they had found yet another like tunnel going up to the surface, and they came up there and they saw people. Quoting, "And then we heard voices, loud voices, complaining of the heat. We went to see where they came from, and there, in the Atreyu chamber, we saw them. But there were no tracks of Shodars upon the sand, nor any Shotars. And their own footprints began suddenly, as if they had swept them away and then gotten tired of sweeping. Rafa and I watched them for many minutes, but all they do is sit in the passageway and complain of the heat." Sharia is definitely troubled by this. I mean, it seems like there are people that arrived as though by magic. So she tells Cinnarin to gather the people together, and if this is some sort of a trap, well, they will just double cross that trap. So they go sneaking up towards the surface to see if they can surround these two people, find out more about them, and probably take them prisoner. We then shift perspective to the boys. And Tercel is sitting there and he's watching Harrier jitter, jive, and pace. Harrier, doesn't like where they are. He doesn't like that it's hot. He is happy that they have water, but, that's about it. And Tercel takes the time to think that, he had always thought that wild mages were wise and serene and calm, and Harrier is definitely ridding him of that thought, because Harrier is about as wise as a rock and as serene as a windstorm. And Tercel also thinks that, maybe the wild magic has a really funny sense of humor. Way more of a sense of humor than the Light Priest had ever talked about, because obviously it has to have a sense of humor since it made Harrier into a wild mage. And he thinks about how different the wild magic is from the high magic, and that the the high magic is discipline, it's rules, and it's probably a magic that Harrier would have liked a whole lot. You know, except Harrier would never have wanted to be bonded to a dragon because that is just way too intense and personal of a connection. So they begin bickering. Harrier points out that, they could go back to Arameth, and no, that definitely isn't going to work. Tercel says maybe they could go back to the elves. Harrier counters with, yeah, the elves sent you off here by yourself. They gave you Ankeldar and told you to figure it out, so I doubt they're going to help you either. And while they're sitting there bickering, all of a sudden, quoting, Harrier got fluidly to his feet. He flipped Ronedia's sword out of his belt towards Tercel. It landed in Tercel's lamp with a stinging thump, and he drew both of his swords. Come out, Harrier said harshly to the wall. I can't see you, but I know you're there. And what he senses, obviously, is Sharia and her warriors. She's a little bit shocked by this. I mean, they've been hiding down there for a few minutes watching these two strangers bicker, and she is amazed that he who she is already thinking is quite foolish and quite loud and very much not like the Nalzindar, was able to sense her somehow. She's impressed by his warrior skill. Tercel calls out to whoever is back there, even though he isn't sure that there's anyone there, that it's fine, come out, we're not going to hurt you. Harrier tells Tercel to shut up and says that they're probably Bisochim's people here to kill them. They probably, whatever. And they argue even more. But Tercel, just to be careful, just to make Harrier feel better, he puts up a mage shield at the end of the passageway. This does make Harrier feel a little bit better, but it makes Sharia feel very much not better, because now she's thinking that there are two demons up here by the well. She does hear Tercel call out, hello, she heard from the other side of the light. Hello? We don't want to hurt you. We didn't know anybody was here. I'm Tercel, and this is my friend Harrier, and... Oh, for light's sake, Tyr. There are probably more of those people that burned down Tarnatha Atreyu. Do you think they're going to listen to you? We have burned nothing, Sharia called, taking another step towards the glowing wall. Sharia's people don't seem any more eager for her to head towards the glowy wall than the two that she now knows are called Harrier and Tercel seem to be to come and meet her. They argue a little bit more, and Sharia thinks, were the situation not so grim, Sharia would have been moved either to disbelief or mirth. She hardly knew what to think. They wielded the weapons of the Endarkened, but argued like children. Harrier and Tercel bicker a little bit more, and then Tercel calls out to Sharia and let Sharia know that the light she sees it's a spell of the high magic. It's not going to hurt you. It's called Mage Shield. Harrier is like, good job, Tercel. Just tell them everything. And Tercel says, you know what, Harrier? Unless these guys are endarkened, they can't really do anything with the things I just told them. And if they were endarkened, well, we'd be dead already, wouldn't we? Sharia lets them know that they're not endarkened, and they talk a little bit more. Harrier and Tercel argue a little bit more, and they try to let each other know that they're maybe on the same side. Sharia asks what the high magic is, and Tercel tells her it's a very old, good magic that was used to fight demons during the last war. And Tercel also tells her that Harrier wants him to tell Sharia that he's surrounded all of her people with mage shields, so they can't actually get to them either. Sharia couldn't see if Tercel was telling the truth or not, but she decides that wisdom is the better part of valor, and she calls all of her people back in. Tercel continues and says, "Hey, look, I know you don't want to trust me. I'm guessing you're hiding here. Maybe you're hiding from other Isvani? Maybe the ones that burned down the Atreyu cities. And we aren't exactly sure why they did that, but..." And Sharia has the other piece of the puzzle that they've been missing. She lets them know that Bisochim is the shadow-touched one, and he obviously has corrupted the Isvani. In her heart, she is utterly horrified by this because she didn't think it could ever go that far, but, whatever. Harrier, he's like, "Oh, good. I was hoping that there was a reasonable explanation after hearing Xanatar going on about the false and true balance and how we were evil before, him and all of his friends came and killed several thousand people." Hearing Xanatar's name, because he was a person that she knew, Sharia now knows that Harrier and Bisochim, despite the fact that she doesn't want it to be true, are telling the truth about the Atreyu cities. Tercel is about to dispel the fire. These guys are coming to trust each other when Ankildar shows up. Ankildar, of course, freaks everybody out, but is kind of the deciding factor in Sharia deciding to trust these guys, because everybody knows Ankildar the Star-Crowned, and unlike Harrier, Sharia and her people believe him when he says that's who he is immediately. She invites the boys down, and Ankildar is very excited, but we'll get to that in a few minutes. Harrier and Tercel come down into the garden areas where the Nelzindar are now living. She is convinced that she has got to honor her guests. They brew kafaya, and they each tell their stories. I do love this. So, quoting, "Tercel and Harrier were not well versed in the proper way of telling a tale. They came from far away in the great cold, and Tercel said that everything there was written down in books, which must be, Sharia supposed, why they spoke so badly, and perhaps why they spoke so loudly as well, but she was patient, and soon enough she had the whole of the tale. It meshed with hers like the fingers of two hands. To know with certainty that Bisochim's intention was to call back the Endarken, though, filled Sharia with despair." They talk a little bit more, trying to get all of the stories straight, and Harrier tells Sharia exactly what Xanatar told him about the fact that the balance has been shifting too much to the light, and that's why he cleansed the Atreyu cities. And Sharia's just like, this is absolutely stupid. And Harrier says, "I'm not even going to mention how stupid it is to decide to fix the wild magic, considering he's been corrupted by the Endarkened. The only question now is, what do we do about it?" "You?" Sharia asked. And though she did her best to school her voice, she knew that her tone conveyed disbelief. Tercel smiled shyly. The elves, they wanted Tercel to come up with an idea to solve the problem. They talk a little bit more about the fact that Harrier and Tercel were sent out by the elves to fix all of this. And then Ankildar pipes up because he's been sitting there listening to them this entire time. Perhaps the answer is here, Ankildar said. This place is far older than I, yet I recognize its like. A city of demons, said Sharia in disbelief, using the oldest name of the Endarkened. The star-crowned blinked at her slowly. Not demons, Sharia. They do not build cities, nor do their creatures build cities in the light. This was once a place of elves, and, if I am correct, of my kind as well. That must have been long ago, said Tercel. Elves and dragons together? And Ankildar doesn't remember it? That would be, said Harrier. From the time of the great queen Vilisar Farkanon, the Star Crown told them, and thus from a long time before there were men at all. Ankildar lets them know that this city that they're in, the ruins of the city that they're in, is from before he was even in existence, and that it must date from about 10,000 years ago, back when the Endarkened were cast down and all of that. And that, you know, Harrier wants to know why, if the legends are true, why there are elven mages now, since logically it wouldn't work, because wasn't part of the legend that the Great Queen paid the second half of her price by renouncing magic for the elves? And Ankildar sighs and says, look, it's the legend. I don't know why we have elven mages now. I'm just happy that we do. The boys talk a little bit more, and that is basically the crux of the chapter, is that now Sharia, Tercel, Ankildar, and Harrier have teamed up, and they have some sort of hope, because Ankildar seems to think that maybe if they just poke around in this ancient, now we know, elven city, maybe they can find the answer of how to defeat the demons and how to defeat Bisochim and everything in this city. If nothing else, it should be a lot of fun to explore. And I have to agree with him. I would go crazy. I would be having so much fun in an ancient city like that I could just poke around in. Now, granted, we can't forget that while they're going to be poking around in this ancient city, Bisochim is still going to be trying to put a demon into some sort of cyborg flesh body. So hopefully the boys don't get too distracted by their new friends and this shiny new old city that they're going to be running around in. But we will just have to wait and see, because that is where the chapter ends, with Harrier, Tercel, and Ankildar all deciding to chill here with the Nalzindar for a little while, explore the city, and see if they can figure out any sort of way to defeat demons in this city where the Great Queen Descender Farkanon once probably resided, and she fought demons, so maybe there's some wisdom buried here. That's the hope anyway. So I think we only have 3 or 4 more chapters after this. Let me see. We've got 20. That is 21. Oh my goodness. I think we are actually going to be finishing off this book in our next recap. So thank you as always for joining me. I hope that you enjoyed that, and I will see you next time.